I remember first hearing about this in 2013, and I was surprised to see that it enjoyed a jolt of popularity during the height of the COVID pandemic when it was featured on a segment on John Oliver's show. It was 1992 in central Pennsylvania, and the local PBS channel was hosting an auction to try and gather funding from the public. These sort of fundraisers are a practice that continues to this day. What was different about this one is that it featured what we would now call Yiff art. Of course, in 1992, this was not a term, and no members of the public watching from home would have known or been familiar with what a furry is. Ironically, the artist wasn't either. At that time, the nascent fandom was vastly different from anything we would recognize today. The internet was not an easily accessible tool for most people, and conventions really didn't exist except for a couple of pop-ons that had happened at science fiction conventions and Conference, which was still in experimental stages. So for Brian Swords, the artist known as Biohazard, even though he had an ongoing and passionate interest in anthropomorphic art, he really didn't have any form of context or friendships or any like-minded individuals to connect with. So by sharing this artwork with the PBS auctioneers, it actually brought him commissioners and like-minded individuals in the central Pennsylvania viewing area who wanted to talk to him or get to know him better or see him paint and depict other scenes. This also helped inspire the artist to make folios and branch out and network more and eventually connect with other furry artists and become more of a figure in the fandom. Biohazard's main influence was The Secret of Nim, a well-known film, and also drawing inspiration from some pet rats, he was inspired to make the anthropomorphic characters of Alice and Bob, which are featured in many of his works, including those that were put up for auction on PBS. Biohazard's main exposure to what exactly furry fandom was at that time would come from mail-order publications that were available. In the early 90s, that was a very short list. Now, you may be wondering how this came about to begin with. Why would PBS have these kind of things for sale to begin with, considering their reputation as family-friendly, educational, etc.? Well, the reason was funding. PBS then, as now, gets a lot of funding from the government, but it's not nearly enough to run production throughout the year. So they rely on grants and estates and all these other charitable foundations and whatever else, but still, arguably, the bulk of it comes from, like they say, viewers like you. And so the auctions are an opportunity to try and garner that extra funding to make sure that they have what they need. And as the saying goes, beggars can't exactly be choosers. So when the network received the artwork to be put up for auction, they had no objections. However, it's interesting in the original footage watching the salespeople kind of walk a delicate line to try and tactfully sell the paintings without expressly describing what's going on, with themes of saying it's up for interpretation to the viewer, or with one auctioneer basically saying it's depicting what humans do and this does not need any further explanation. As far as what's actually going on in the paintings, it certainly could be more explicit. It's definitely toned down, especially by modern standards of the fandom, but there is a visible penis, although flaccid, and other things pop up in the scene like a tub of KY jelly. But essentially, the network did not care because the paintings were selling, like one of the salespersons said, like hotcakes, and that's all they were really interested in at first. But later on, they claimed to have gotten some phone calls of complaint, and a conversation took place that the artwork should be toned down, and ultimately that's where the artist Biohazard and the local PBS channel parted company. This is a very interesting story to look back on, considering the time and context. Nowadays, furry fandom has practically become a household name, and this is actually proving somewhat detrimental when you consider negative media appearances, targeted attacks by outspoken individuals or pranksters showing up to crash conventions. But in 1992, nobody realized what they were seeing, and so it's interesting watching the public react with the fandom on this level.